I'm Jonathan Weinberg. Last month, I had the honor to interview Charles Debbas, who designed the Taranis Fountain Pen. I review the pen in a separate video and talk about, the way it looks and writes. But here, I wanted to talk to him about the process of making this pen that premiered in 2013. I learned that he also designed a ergonomic pen that really was revolutionary, the first of its kind in the late 90s. And he talks a little bit about that and how actually that led to him designing the fountain pen for Sheaffer. He's an extraordinary person and I think really charismatic. And you can tell, I think, from this short interview, what a wonderful teacher he must be. And I'm really excited to see the other kinds of things that he comes up with in his work. He has a fantastic website, which I strongly recommend, with a lot of his projects and buildings that he's designed and other industrial design products. So I recommend that you look at it. And I want to really thank him for answering my questions and being so frank and honest about the process. As always, please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's the way to show your appreciation for all the work that goes into these videos.
I'm Charles Debbas. I'm based in Berkeley. I'm an architect. Been doing this for about 37 years, and branched off into product design in '94. I was born in Lebanon, and then I left Lebanon at age 17 because of the war, through some, I'm not going to go into the tragic circumstances, but like every war, I was one of the victims that had to leave. Then came into Fresno to junior college. My brother was studying agriculture there, and then eventually transferred to Berkeley, did my undergraduate degree at Berkeley. And then worked for 2 years with one of the disciples of Le Corbusier, and then went back to graduate school at Berkeley, taught for a year or so after that, and then started my practice between 80. I think my first project was in '89, so a couple of years after that, and that came about because of I had applied to, I think, 300 jobs and was rejected by all of them. We were going through recession back then.
Right.
And so somebody had heard of my thesis, which I did as a graduate thesis, which was a meditation garden, contemplation garden in Washington, D.C., which was a real project, which was approved by the Reagan administration back then. That got entangled into politics, so it kind of withered away. But it was the first memorial in Washington, D.C. To promote and elevate peace. It wasn't a memorial for a war or somebody who was dead. So that was actually became the foundation of all of my work.
What a wonderful idea.
Having come out of... So, yes.
I just want to interrupt. Could you just say who your teacher was? The Corbusier, was he Harvard?
No. He was a person I worked with. His name was Jacques Ligier-Belair. He was a Belgian architect, and I met him in Lebanon. Actually, went back after my undergraduate degrees for a year and a half, and to see if at the time after the Israeli invasion of '82, there was a lot of hope that Lebanon was going to stand back on its feet. And so he offered me a job. I worked with him for 2 years, one of the most brilliant architects I've ever had a chance to deal with. And then within a year and a half, I knew there was absolutely no hope. There was kind of it's sort of the beginning of fundamentalism. And I felt that it was a one-way street.
But he was somebody who actually worked with Corbusier. I mean,
yes,
he directly.
He worked with him in India on his Indian projects. Okay. He traveled in his deux chevaux from France to India, stopped in Lebanon for a break, met his future wife there, and then ended up working for Le Corbusier and then settling back in Lebanon, unfortunately for him, because I think he was unfortunately trapped in the whole mess that the whole area is in,
Right.
and never was never recognized for the great person he was and the great architect he was. And he passed away just a couple of months ago at 95 or
Well,
96.
so I always like to acknowledge teachers, so I'm glad that
Oh,
you're talking about
he
him.
there were two people who had a huge influence on me. We can get into the second one. That this guy had an immense influence on me, and one of the things he taught me was humility, kindness, and restraint, and never to fall in love with my work.
Oh.
And and then the other professor that really changed my life, his name was Sim Vanderen in graduate school. Um he was my advisor, and he I don't know if you know about him. I'm sure people should know about him. He wrote the book
Right.
on sustainable architecture back in the 50s,
Oh, right. The name's on. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Okay.
he was the state architect during Jerry Brown's first gig as a governor. And every building he did in Sacramento was passive solar. We're talking mid 70s,
Wow.
way ahead of his time.
Right.
And so he was my advisor, an amazingly close friend. He's also in his mid 90s now. And he, as part of the thesis, he asked me what I wanted to do my thesis on, and I thought I would do it on, because one of my most sort of admired work was Le Corbusier's Ronchamp Chapel,
Right.
just because of it broke every ground possible. It was, I don't know where he got this grain of genius. It just came out, but it had subtle things in there that actually encouraged human behavior, encouraged meditation, encouraged spirituality. I'm not going to go into religions. I'm more of a spiritual guy than a religious guy, but I
Hmm.
thought the building was a nice conduit for all our senses and emotions as human beings. And so he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I'd like to design a church or a cathedral. And I went on and on about why and all of this stuff, and he let me talk for about 20 minutes, and then he stopped me. He says, Charles, my synagogue is everywhere. And I was, it didn't really hit me until the next day, and and uh, and then it's become sort of my guiding light. uh,
Hmm.
I don't have to design a pen, a building, a bathroom, high rise, or a church to make it a sanctuary for our soul. So everything I approach has to touch us as a human being, or as human beings in specific ways. And we'll get back to the pen and how that affected the pen. And I've never walked into a religious building again the same way. I see everything around me as a sanctuary, and I see all my work as a conduit to
No,
our
no.
senses.
So he, well, I assume that since he said synagogue, he was Jewish, but that
Yes,
seems a very, it also seems a very Buddhist notion.
yes. Well, he was the quintessential hippie. He grew up. I mean, he
Ah,
had remember in the late 70s, a lot of the people teaching at Berkeley were,
of course.
children of or admirers of the 60s movements and peace and all of that stuff. And so he was a Buddhist. He wasn't religious, uh,
Right.
but that particular phrase really redirected my life
Hmm.
completely. And I've never seen architecture, design, or religion the same way again, ever.
Yeah, no, no,
Yeah.
it
Which
makes sense.
which and I just love
I'm
him to
sort of a
tears.
secular Buddhist, so I'm
Yeah.
very struck by that. I'm touched.
Yeah.
I mean, but as you pointed out, there's the paradox that, and I feel it very much in my obsession with collecting fountain pens, that on some level, you're not supposed to desire things. You're not supposed to, you're not supposed to be, involved with possessions. And so it's something of a paradox to be someone who designs beautiful things and beautiful buildings, and at the same time, as you say, recognize that any place can be beautiful in a certain way, or you could bring, you know, within yourself, right? You don't actually, I assume also in a certain way, you don't even have to make the design. It doesn't have to be made in 3 dimensions, you know.
No, I think Eric Clapton said it best. They asked him once how he composed music. He says, I don't, I just interpret what comes to me.
Hmm.
And I think as human beings, there are so many layers that we don't understand, that we're not aware of, that guide our lives, and so I really believe in that, and as much as we want to sort of segment and divide the world and divide ourselves up, there's, we all share one thing in common, our humanity, in some cases our lack of humanity, unfortunately, and on our brief journey right here. So to me, what I do is more of an homage to what I leave behind in terms of kindness and hopefully beauty, more than what I leave behind in terms of edifices, basically. Because
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I interrupted you. You were telling the story of your thesis.
yes,
Yes, right.
so the thesis was there was a proposal to design a peace memorial in Washington, D.C., in the memory of Khalil Gibran, who was,
Yes.
Lebanese American, obviously, of him. And so I read all his work, and I wasn't really very sort of familiar with it, but ended up designing it was about 4 acres meditation garden that was actually driven and directed by his poetry and his philosophy in life, which was mainly peaceful, uh, humble, everything probably you and I share,
Right,
and
right. And also he's very popular at that
he was
time
very popular.
in the
Exactly.
70s, and he's now hardly anyone talks about him, but he was
That's
very.
exactly it.
So this is 1980, you would
That
say?
was 1985.
85. Okay.
I was in graduate school back then.
Okay.
So I did the thesis. It became kind of the talk of the graduate program, even after it fell apart. And so anyway, I applied to a lot of jobs, couldn't get it. Finally, somebody out of the blue calls me and says, I heard about your thesis, a German woman, wonderful, amazing woman. She says, I would like you to design a flower shop for me in Berkeley.
Ah,
And I said, why? She says, I've interviewed all these architects. You're the only one who I think understands what I want. And I did. It took, 3 years of fighting the city of Berkeley, in design review, and we got really petty. And finally, she stuck by me, and the flower shop was built and published uh, quite generously, and became kind of a focus point of new construction in Berkeley. And that was my first project. And then after that, I started getting more and more work and more publications over the next few years. In 1994, we're still drafting by hand. AutoCAD wasn't really, a big thing back then.
mhm.
And I was drafting 10, 15 hours a day, and my hand was killing me. So I decided I was going to, come up with an ergonomic pen. So I did. I designed this ergonomic pen and made a clay prototype. Ended up making some 3D prints of that, which cost me at the time $30,000 for 6 prototypes, just to show you
Wow.
how far we've come in 3D printing and
No, I
technology.
know.
And then everybody thought I would fail, so that actually put more fire under me. And so I went to New York to the stationery show with my 6 prototypes. No production, no trademark, no patent, nothing. Just to test the ground. And I came back with 10 folders of orders,
Wow.
including Disney, Discovery, Bloomingdale's, Macy's. And that was in May. And then by September, we started delivering. So I did
Wow.
molds, patents, production,
Hmm.
graphic design, everything in 2 months. That was
Wow.
crazy. So that's what launched me into the pen business. Well, we had a plastic version and an aluminum. This is the plastic version here. Oh,
Oh, wonderful.
this one right there.
Oh, look how great that
Yeah.
is. It's
And then this was, I
wonderful.
think, that's a left-handed one. So you had a left hand and then a right hand version, depending on how the grip went. And then we had this aluminum version
Yes, oh,
here
that's beautiful.
with a cap that pulls off, and I actually assembled every single one of the aluminum ones because they were actually pretty complex and delicate. Um, so within 2 years, I think we were in 2,500 stores, 80 museums.
Wow.
Hired a PR company that did mostly wine marketing. Who decided, the person decided to help me out, and
Right.
we ended up in Newsweek, CBS This Morning. I mean, every major
No, I
newspaper
saw.
magazine in the world.
Right. So why did that stop?
It didn't stop. Actually,
Oh, it did.
I grew the business till 2001. And as you might imagine, when you have a successful business, you never see any cash. Because
No,
everything,
no, I didn't imagine that. I would hope that that wasn't the
no, you
case.
don't, because every dime that comes in goes into producing the next batch, which is
Well,
typically
that's the
3 times.
capitalist thing, right? But at some point, or you sell it to somebody else, I suppose.
That's what I did.
Right.
So
Okay.
we got 2 orders for 25 million pens, and we could only produce 100,000 a year.
Right. Right.
So I reached out to cold called Bic, and I said,
Right.
"Hey, I have a company for sale." Within 2 days, they invited me to New York to meet Mr. Bic himself.
And
They
now they
bought it.
put their name on it. I
They,
see.
they they bought it in sorry, they bought it in 2001, a few months
Right.
before the crash, thank God for me. And they had bought Sheaffer as well. And
Right.
they wanted a middle ground designer pen, more of a gift item, because the disposable pens are a dime a dozen, and the
Right.
Sheaffer pens were expensive. They wanted something that would be more accessible to younger people. The good thing that came out of it is that I ended up as a consultant for them.
For
Uh,
Schaefer,
and,
which then got sold to another company, right?
it got sold to
Cross.
Cross. Cross,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
But at the
Okay.
time, it was still Schaefer, and they asked me, because some of the people I dealt with who became really good friends from Bic and Schaefer became my biggest proponents inside the company, asked me to design fountain pens for
Hmm.
them. And a lot of the ideas are ideas I brought forth myself, like even their whole new shavers lines. They didn't. I proposed that they redesign this, and I helped redesign most of them, the
Oh my
disposable
goodness.
shavers. And then on the pens, on the fountain pens themselves, they asked me to come up with something innovative. And one of the people that was in charge back then, or relatively in charge, who really appreciated design, asked me where I would take fountain pens, and I said I would sort of tap into automotive design and see where we can go with that. Not in a specific way, but in terms of sleekness, in terms of integrating features and all of that stuff. And so
Did
I
you
came
use a
up.
fountain pen at that point?
Yeah, I use Lamy all the time. I love Lamy.
Oh,
Lamy was just
okay.
incredible. And
So just would you like were you using a Lamy 2000? Was that
yes,
what
the
you?
Lamy
Yes. Okay.
2000,
Yeah.
exactly, which
Right.
which is phenomenal. I mean,
Yes.
there's nothing that's, and I think it's an absolutely perfect pen.
Let's go
Yeah.
back to
Well,
the
this
process.
pen what came after, these studies that I made early on for them about sort of reinventing the fountain pen. And the original design for this pen, which I have a 3D prototype here of, was meant to have a triangular grip. It
Okay.
went from square at the ends down to a triangle in the middle. And I thought it looked absolutely phenomenal. And it was so comfortable. And unfortunately, they ran a focus group at
Of
Schaefer
course.
that came back and told them, no, every fountain pen needs a round cross section. And mine was also retractable initially. Uh,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So unfortunately, it went through all these dilutions, into what it is today. Even the colors were different. I didn't have a shiny a shiny chrome. Mine was matte chrome. It
Okay.
had a leather grip, which they took out. It had a lot of features. My original one wasn't as shiny as this. It was a bit more subdued. And I think the take on that was that they were hoping to market that to an emerging Chinese clientele that liked something more glittery and gold and all of that stuff, which
Hmm.
drove.
So when they say to you, well, we want you to design a fountain pen, do they say it has to be this, 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 or do they sort
No.
of they just gave you, oh, you came up with something, and then
Yeah,
they said no, no, no. It was more like
exactly.
that, right? I
That's
see.
it. That's
Yeah,
exactly it.
I see.
They've never given me any guidelines on any of the designs, even the shavers. I mean, I came up with all these designs.
Well, how
When
would you know? How would you know that they could even make it though?
Oh,
Like,
because the person in charge of the Iowa factory became
right,
a very close friend of mine. There was
right.
another guy, Ryan, who also did a lot of the mechanical engineering on the inside, how
I
the air
see.
flowed and all of that stuff. So I was coordinating very closely with both of them, uh, the design part with the production and the technical parts of the pens. So I didn't assume I knew better than they
You
did.
just, oh, it's sad, it's
And
sad.
then there's a person down in San Diego. His name is Jerry Taylor, who did at the time all my 3D printing. So basically, we every time I tried something, he would help us 3D print it so we could feel it, sense it, look at it in proportions. And
So they didn't say to you, well, you need to make a pen that's like $100 or, you
no,
know, no. And
no.
you just sort of decided, and in your head, how much did you think this pen was going to cost? Did
Well,
you have thought that you were going after a did you want it to be an expensive pen or what
well,
were you thinking?
they already had a very expensive line. So
Right.
this was supposed to be in the
Right. Oh
200,
God.
250 range initially. So when I designed it, always had that in mind, obviously.
Right.
Um, and then and then they moved the production somewhere else from Iowa. So I don't know where, that link ended up. But yeah, no, initially it was somewhere in the middle, not a
Right.
high-end pen and not a cheap uh, sort of disposable fountain pen either. But my goal all along was to try to match the quality and the tolerances that Lamy had on their Lamy 2000, which
Hmm.
which is spectacular. For that price point at the time, it was very hard to do.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah.
And at that point, they thought they would still make it in the United States, right? Or did they in the beginning? Or
Initially they did, and then
I
it moved
see.
overseas, I believe.
I
Yeah,
have the car one though, which
yes.
is how does that happen? Does that happen
Okay.
independently too, or did
Well,
you know that that was going to happen?
that's a
Right.
story on in its own.
Okay.
Sheaffer had a licensing deal with Ferrari,
Okay.
and they came to me and asked me to design a line of Ferrari pens. Okay, which look
Right.
nothing like this one, by the way.
Okay.
I went back and I'm a car design freak, especially Italian design. So
Right.
I went back to the origins of Ferrari design and came up. Unfortunately, I can't share that on screen with you because it's proprietary. Came up
Right.
with 8 Ferrari pens
Okay.
that are absolutely, I think, spectacular. Evoke Ferrari in an instant. So I proposed those right as Sheaffer was selling to Cross. And
Okay.
so they decided, as a stopgap measure, to take the Taranis pen here
Hmm.
and do a red Ferrari version of that, which I wasn't aware of. Actually, I buy it
Ah,
on eBay to offer friends. I didn't even know they were going into production, but
I
it became
see.
a very good seller at Ferrari. Um, so Ferrari kind of found its way onto Taranis, uh, I think for simplicity's sake. And, I don't, I
So
did,
so let's come back to this design that
yes,
obviously is a compromise, as they say.
yes, yes.
How did it come to be the way this is?
Well, on
And
the fountain pen specifically, I wanted to make sure that the nib and the front part of the pen were well coordinated and balanced together. That's why you have that chrome piece running all the way around.
Mhm.
And then initially, it was also supposed to tie to the clip. So because it was one long loop all the way around, that was shortened a little bit. And then the square ends, I dug back to the original Sheaffer designs of the 30s, which
Mhm.
had square ends, which for some reason somebody forgot they had. And
Mhm.
I re introduced that onto the pen line, which is actually a signature piece for Sheaffer, that square end. So I whenever I design, whether it's for Sheaffer, Bic, or architecture, I always look at precedents and history and the DNA of that company and try to kind of refresh that and
Right. Well, this is one of their, of course, one of their great classic pens.
yes,
It's
yes,
from the late 50s. Has a
yes,
sexist name. They're very,
yes,
it's meant for men. The pen,
yes, yes,
fountain pen for men, right?
yes, yes,
But
yes,
yeah, you're right. It has a very similar
and
top and
pieces, yeah,
bottom to what you
yeah,
did. So you're
yeah,
bringing that back. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. And also, I based it on automotive design,
Right.
where, things flow from one thing to another. And like I said,
And were you thinking at all about, so everybody, I suppose the most storied pen of the 20th century is the Parker 51. I mean,
yes,
that's,
yes,
were you
yes,
thinking of that too?
which is a brilliant pen. It
Right.
writes amazingly well.
Right, right. So you were thinking
Yes.
about that. And you decide you wanted, it wasn't Schaefer that wanted you to have this kind of a nib. You
No,
decided
no,
that
I
you
no,
wanted it to have
no.
a semi-hooded nib. That was your,
That's correct. That's
right.
correct. And the original lib was even a closer match to that chrome piece as well. And
I
then
see.
we had to move it away because of technical issues on that.
I see. I see. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it starts out with a kind of plan, and then you keep compromising and compromising to get it to work. But it's
Well,
interesting to me because I would have imagined that there was more of a kind of, like they gave you these orders, and so it has
no,
to do this and
no,
this and
no,
that. And then,
no.
but then when you come up with things, they tell you no, no, no.
Yeah, well, when I first presented this, Jonathan, just to let you know, I mean, there was a lot of resistance inside of Schaefer.
Hmm.
I think half the group was very uh, happy with it. The other half thought it was way too modern for Schaefer or way too contemporary for the Schaefer
Interesting.
line. And so the compromise, I think, came more from the inside than from myself. I think there were some people pushing for the integrity of the initial design as I presented it, and others that kind of boiled it down to something that was more comfortable for them.
Now,
That's
if you've read some of the reviews, probably the thing that people are most controversial, I would say,
yes,
is the part that comes and also makes it it's the most original part of the design, which
yes,
is to
yes,
say, is this coming down here? And
yes.
then some people feel that the logo is too long,
I
too
agree.
big.
I agree.
That was
That
their
that was
decision?
intentional. That was
Right,
intentional. But like I said, the original design had
right.
that whole piece as matte chrome.
I see.
So
So it would
so
have
it
been
was a
too
bit
big.
more discreet. Let's put it
Right.
this way. Once you shine it up, it becomes more evident. So basically, uh, this was the sort of the initial, sort of sketches that I did for that.
Ah,
Can you see that?
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And
And
then
this is all on your website.
yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
And then the upper left is basically the initial pen design, like
Ah,
version one, which had a retractable nib, and you can see the back, which is squared. I'm going to go to actually, let me go to here. The back that is squared actually twisted and pulled the nib in or out.
and would it have been a cartridge filler
It
still?
would have been both cartridge and a pump.
And a converter, right?
Yes,
Yes, got
yes.
it. Yes.
And so that was my first instinct, and then the retractable part kind of went away, and then
Right.
we added the cap. But this is pretty close to what the triangular shape.
Boy, that's beautiful. And it looks much more like one of your buildings.
Yes, it's a bit more balanced, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, what is that material? It looks like rubber, but is it
Let me just
because it looks like it has a kind of ergonomic rubber like
just a
material
second.
in the
Let me
first design.
I don't know where it's. Oh, No, that was supposed to be a simile leather kind of thing.
I see.
You know, a washable
Oh,
leather-like,
it's beautiful.
a piece, perforated again to bring up the automotive
Right.
language into that.
And you didn't want to have a clip.
Yeah, there is a clip. It's a retractable clip on the other
Oh, it
side.
had a retractable clip. Now
Yeah,
this pen would have been very expensive, I think.
yeah, it was. It was. But then we diluted it to something that's actually
Right.
halfway between what you see
Yes.
with the latest one, and you can see initially in those sketches. I mean, they're not kind of, but you know how long the clip was. The idea was to
Right.
actually sort of carry over to the other side of it.
Do you feel that nevertheless, the design, even though it isn't what you originally wanted, do you feel that it's still the pen is sufficiently
I think so. I think
it's still
so. I mean,
beautiful.
you know, Jonathan, since I designed it and I know what the potential could have been, there's
Uh,
always a part of me that says, I wish
right, right,
anything, the triangular section, you know, cross section
right,
in itself would have made a lot of difference. But all in all, I think the response to the design has been phenomenal by
right,
people who write me, and it still stands. It sells out on Amazon all the time. I mean, I sometimes
right.
have to wait to get some.
So that was the interview with Charles Debbas. He really was so generous to speak to me. And if you want to know more about the pen itself and how it writes and draws, don't forget to go look at that video, part one of this two-part series. As always, please subscribe if you enjoyed this and want to support the work that I'm doing.